A 17-year-old named Tyrek stood in the lobby of his own apartment building with a straight razor folded into his backpack, waiting. Every afternoon, around the same time, a boy named Steed Wallace walked his girlfriend home from school through that same door. When the couple came in from the cold, Tyrek pulled the blade and lunged for Steed's stomach. Steed threw himself backward just fast enough that the razor only opened his chin, a long cut where the jaw meets the cheek. But Tyrek's own momentum kept carrying him forward, and when he stumbled, the blade was still out in front of him, and it went into the stomach of the girl standing just behind Steed. She was pregnant. Steed would later say her skin tore with a sound like paper ripping. The other Crips bolted out the door. The girl folded over a wound that was already killing the child inside her, and the boy who loved her stood in that lobby screaming her name. Her name was Patrice Cunningham, and depending on who you ask, she is either the girl two boys went to war over or a name that got pinned to a war she never asked to start. This happened in a suburb, not the Bronx, not Brooklyn, not South Central, a working-class village on Long Island, 40 minutes from Manhattan, with a charter school down the block and a Mercedes dealership a few streets over. A village of around 55,000 people where, between 2007 and 2011 alone, 186 people were shot, roughly half of them in a long, grinding war between two gangs that had carried their colors east out of Los Angeles a generation earlier. That afternoon in the lobby was the first cut. What grew out of it would shoot dozens of people, kill children in their own bedrooms, empty whole blocks, and end years later with a body on a snowy corner in New Jersey. To understand how a teenage love triangle turned into all of that, let's go back to the moment a mother 3,000 miles away decided the only way to save her son was to move him across the country. Steed Wallace had already joined the blood set in Southern California when his mother made her decision. She could see exactly where it was taking him, so she packed up the family and moved them east to Hempstead, hoping a few thousand miles might break the hold the gang had on her boy. What she couldn't have known was that the thing she was fleeing had already sunk deeper roots here than it had back home. The Bloods and Crips had carried their colors east years earlier and turned this quiet-looking village into some of the most contested drug ground in the state. She had moved her son off one set's corner and set him down on the doorstep of a war that hadn't started yet. For a while, it almost worked anyway, because in Hempstead, Steed met Patrice. She was one of the prettiest girls at the local high school, and he fell hard and fast. She set a single condition on the whole thing. She knew where he had been out west, and she told him plainly it would not fly here. He could be down for her or down for a gang, and not both. He gave her his word. The banging was finished, and the promise held because Patrice got pregnant, and Steed lit up at the thought of being somebody's father. He started talking about marrying her after graduation, building a life that didn't end on a corner. For the first time since California, the corner held no pull on him. He walked her home every afternoon, the whole neighborhood grown used to the sight of them, and he let himself believe the move had worked exactly the way his mother had prayed it would. 2 floors down in the same building lived Tyrek. He'd wanted Patrice for a long time, and he never stopped trying, no matter how many times she told him she was Steed's girl and meant it. To Tyrek, her steadiness only made her more worth having. He convinced himself she was flirting back, that the only thing in his way was the boy from California who'd shown up and taken what should have been his. More than once, the two of them nearly came to blows, and more than once, Tyrek backed off at the last second, and Steed wrote him off as a punk right in front of her. Not man enough for a girl like that. The humiliation didn't leave Tyrek. It sat in him and curdled, and a humiliated boy hunting for a way to prove himself is the most dangerous thing a neighborhood like this can produce. His chance came 2 months later. The Crips offered him official membership on one condition: to wear the color, he had to kill a blood. For Tyrek, the order landed almost like a gift, a way to turn the humiliation he had been carrying into standing. He told them he already had one in mind. The next afternoon, he was waiting in that lobby with the razor, and what was meant to be an initiation, a body or earn his place, turned into something messier and worse. Steed ran upstairs for Patrice's parents while she bled on the lobby floor, and her father came running down with bathroom towels, pressing them to the wound in his only child's stomach, howling at Steed to know what he'd done. Steed lived. Patrice survived the blade itself, but the baby did not. And in the chaos right after, with her father screaming and a crowd filling the lobby, the police arrived and put the handcuffs on the wrong boy. Her father had seen his daughter bleeding on the floor and drawn the only conclusion a terrified man could draw, pointing at Steed and saying Steed had stabbed her. Steed opened his mouth to give them Tyrek's name, and then he saw the faces in the crowd, and he understood that the word snitch would ruin him worse than any charge ever could. So he said nothing and served months in county lockup for a wound he hadn't inflicted. As soon as Patrice could travel, her family carried her back to Los Angeles, putting a coast between their only child and everything that had happened in that building. Every hustler in Hempstead could have told Steed what falling for a girl might cost him, because every hustler knew the story of Fat Rick. Back in the 90s, Rick had turned the MLK projects into his own fiefdom, a 350-pound legend said to have made millions on coke and heroin and to keep a small harem of women scattered across the village. What finally killed him was not a rival's ambition or a police case. It was tenderness. He warned one of his women, a hairdresser named Sheila, to stay clear of a certain bodega on a certain night because a rival named Carlos Slim was going to be killed there. What Rick didn't know was that Sheila was sleeping with Carlos too. She made one phone call, and instead of walking into the trap, Carlos and his crew staked out Rick's building and met the big man with a volley from their .45s. The lesson got handed down corner to corner like scripture. Tell a woman nothing, because no woman is worth dying over. It was the one rule that mattered, and falling for Patrice, promising to leave the game for her, was Steed breaking it long before he understood the stakes. The Crips decided the stabbing was proof enough. Tyrek hadn't killed his blood, but he'd shown them he could put steel in a body without blinking, and they brought him in days later. They put him on the corners, moving crack and weed, and on Saturdays, he'd steal a car and drive the members without records down to Virginia or Pennsylvania to buy guns, bringing them north to keep some and sell the rest for double. At night, he sat in his bedroom, filing serial numbers off pistols and sawing the barrels down on shotguns. He rose fast, dropped out of school, tattooed a Crips sign across his chest, built a name as a hustler who got things done, as comfortable robbing a bodega as clearing a Blood's corner with his fists or a submachine gun. For a teenager, he carried an unheard of amount of weight, managing corner crews, settling disputes between grown men, carrying out hits himself. In the stash houses, he kept the lights off so any passing drive-by would have nothing to aim at, and his own people came to speak of him as a kind of gangland prodigy, smarter and colder than anyone Hempstead had produced before. What set him apart was the cold patience underneath it all. When a stick-up crew once robbed the Crips of a whole cocaine package they still owed their supplier for, the older members panicked. Tyrek talked them down and told them to step on the remaining coke 3 times instead of once, cutting it with powdered milk and Epsom salt to stretch it. The crack came out weaker, but they sold more of it, made the money back, and not a single customer complained. So from then on, they cut everything that way and tripled their profits. When the set's leader was killed in a shootout with Bloods over in Brooklyn, Tyrek stepped into the top spot. He opened new corners, gave junkies free morning samples to spread the word, and partnered with his street manager, Tony, to chase down a higher purity cocaine connect through a couple of Mexican suppliers in Manhattan. The two of them drove to Walmart, bought baking soda and a saucer and some pans, and cooked their first batch in the kitchen. Within months, the operation was a money machine, and Tyrek ran it less like Scarface than like Bill Gates. Off the street, on the phone, watching margins and police patrols the way a chief executive watches a quarterly report. All of it, the empire, the corners, the king he'd become, had started with the scar he put on Steed's chin. One cut in a lobby over one girl had made one boy a ruler of an underworld and sent the other into exile, carrying a debt he would spend the next 5 years trying to find a way to collect. 2 boys had wanted the same girl. One turned that wanting into a body of work on a throne. The other turned it into a wound that never closed. Patrice herself was already gone, 3,000 miles west, with no idea that her name was about to become the story of a war. Steed spent those years looking for Patrice. 4 months into his case, with nobody willing to testify, his lawyer pleaded the stabbing down to assault, and he walked out on time served. The first thing he did was buy a ticket to Los Angeles to find her and make it right. He walked neighborhoods. He stood outside a different high school every day, hoping to catch her face in a crowd. To feed himself, he did the only thing he knew, falling in with a Bloods crew in South Central and rising until he ran it as a co-leader. After 5 years, the only answer he ever got was a letter. She forgave him, she wrote, and asked him to please leave her be. He let her go. 5 years, chasing one girl, had quietly remade him into the exact thing she begged him to leave behind, and about all he had kept of his old self was the grief. But there was one piece of unfinished business he could not set down, and it had a name. Tyrek was running the Hempstead Crips now, rich and untouchable, and he had never paid for any of it. So when his old friend Michael Ice Williams called and asked him to bring some good California coke out to Long Island, Steed came back east, not for the money, but for the man who'd taken his child and his girl and his face in a single afternoon. He and Ice opened a market down on Martin Luther King Drive and pushed straight into Crips territory, and a personal debt 6 years in the making became a war that would consume the whole village. Ice was not a simple gangster. He had earned a business degree and chased a white-collar career until it stalled out, passed over, he believed, for the color of his skin, before drifting back to the projects where he'd grown up and into the gang he'd come up in. He talked about the whole conflict in the language of a boardroom, calling his beef with the Crips a corporate fight you might read about in the Wall Street Journal, only their product was rock cocaine. He could have gone either way in life, and everyone around him could feel it. The kind of man his own people believed was always one good season from getting out for good. The world Steed came home to was already a battlefield. The drug market sat in a blighted pocket where 3 streets met at 3 angles, a piece of ground locales called the Triangle, and that geometry was the whole prize. Whoever held the corners inside it could see every car and every person approaching from any direction, which made it murder for police to sneak up and just as hard for a rival to roll through unseen. A Hempstead native named Mike Clary, a Marine who'd done 3 tours in Iraq, came home and said the place felt familiar. The screaming kids, the gunshots at all hours, the fear you felt walking to the corner store were the same things he'd felt in Fallujah. The numbers backed him up. In a matter of weeks, a 16-year-old lost a sight in one eye to a stray round, another child lost an ear, and a third was lying in bed reading The Cat in the Hat when a bullet came through his window and took off 2 of his fingers. Neither side would give an inch, and the reason came down to math. Both crews could buy top-grade cocaine straight from major traffickers for as little as $17,000 a kilo, well under the going rate, and they were better armed and quicker to fire than any of the smaller cliques around them. They cooked the powder into crack in a string of houses, broke it into $10 and $20 rocks, and turned a single kilo into a small fortune. The corners that moved it were worth killing for, so they killed for them. The corners themselves ran like a business. A tout barked out the product names and took the cash. A runner, usually the skinniest kid in the crew, sprinted the drugs out from a hidden stash. A lookout watched for police or bloods. A trembling regular everyone called Charlie Bones would shuffle up at opening, hand over a creased 20, and the tout would hold the bill to the light and sniff it to be sure it hadn't been pissed on before waving him toward the building. The crews rebranded their product every few weeks the way Madison Avenue rebrands soap. One month the rocks were Luda, then Scarface, then Ghost Rider, while nothing about the drug ever changed. Only the name on the bag. They ran it out of a clubhouse apartment that gave almost nothing away. A Biggie poster on the wall, a dartboard, a television kept on the local news all day so the crew could see who'd been shot overnight. The gunfire got so constant that the police department's gunshot detection system logged so many rounds in those few blocks that officers briefly assumed the machine had broken. Into all of it, every Friday near midnight, walked a preacher named Kirk Lyons and a band of middle-aged men who marched straight through both crews' markets to pray with whoever they found. The first night nearly killed them. A wall of Crips advanced on them, hands sliding toward waistbands, until Lyons looked down and realized half his marchers wore red shirts and the gang had taken them for bloods. He got the words out just in time. The rule they gave him for next time was simple. No red. That was the only pass he'd get. By then, the shooting was almost nightly. A car full of bloods would roll slow past the Crips corner to make sure everyone knew a truce was a rumor and nothing more. The Crips would pile into a Cadillac and drive past the rival hangout to answer it. The men learned to watch every car that slowed the way soldiers watch a tree line. The first blood of Steed's war came in January when a Crip named Dice Beckles was thought to have shot Doc Reed, one of the Blood's high-ranking dealers, in the stomach. The bullet just missed an artery. Doc came out of the hospital still wearing his intensive care bracelet, ran a hand over the bandage, and said somebody had to pay. 2 nights later, the Bloods answered. A crew rolled past the Crips stash house and opened up 15, 20 rounds, meaning to kill Dice. Dice hit the deck the second the shooting started. The boy who didn't was a baby-faced 16-year-old the crew called Little James Carter. By the time the squad cars came screaming up the block, the shooting was over and there was nothing left in the street but shadows, a quarter-size hole punched clean through the boy's forehead, and a single blood-soaked Air Jordan thrown 10 feet from his body, his mate resting beside him in a spreading pool of blood. After the medical examiner finally carried James away, one of his own friends, an aspiring rapper who'd been working the corner as a lookout that week, walked over, picked the high tops up out of the road, and wore them the next morning on the very corner where James had bled out. No shame in this game, the boy said. They were too fresh to let go to waste. Nobody talked to the police. The code there ran on a single phrase, snitches get stitches, and the people in those buildings knew the gangs lived right next door long after the detectives went home. The one promising lead only proved the point. A woman called a police tip line, swearing she'd overheard a blood bragging about going to shoot a Crip, and she gave a plate number. Detectives traced the car, certain they'd cracked it, and knocked to find a hunchbacked old addict who shuffled off for his dentures while his elderly girlfriend offered them coffee. The tip turned out to be a jealous ex with a grudge, framing the old man for taking back another woman. The lead died there the way all of them did. 3 days later, they laid James in a narrow ivory casket, the bullet still lodged in his heart, while some of the Bloods posted photographs of his body online with fresh threats. His little brother leaned over the open casket and tried to pry his eyes open, and when they wouldn't stay, lowered his head and begged him to wake up. Tyrek stayed away from the funeral, knowing police would work the crowd, but the next day, he walked to the grave alone, chain-smoking Newports over the fresh dirt, calling the boy a soldier. He felt no guilt, he said. He hadn't pulled the trigger. The kid had asked him for work and he'd given it. And without his money, he added, there'd be no jobs, no church, no casket, no plot in the ground. His money couldn't stink because nobody ever turned it down. After that, the killing only accelerated because a shot left unanswered in the triangle reads as weakness, and weakness gets you robbed and then buried. Soon, it was the Bloods grieving. Lamar Crawford, ICE's fast-rising protege, got caught alone and out in the open one night with no gun on him and took a round in the chest. His own crew found him curled in the street, shirt soaked through, shaken into a seizure. They argued over whether to even call for help, weighing his life against the certainty of police questions, until a neighbor settled it. They stood over him swearing the slug was nothing, that he'd be stitched up like new, and then he went still. His girlfriend came stumbling out in her bathrobe, pushed through the crowd, saw it was him, and let out a scream the paramedics swore they heard from a mile away. The Bloods scattered before the cars arrived, and she was left standing alone over the body. Not even Lamar's own Aunt Donna Crawford would tell the detectives what she knew. She explained her silence with the simplest arithmetic there is. 15 years earlier, her son had been murdered, and she'd helped the police find the boy who did it. And the day after that arrest, his gang came back and killed her other son in retaliation in her arms. She had one child left. She would rather every criminal in the world walk free, she said, than say a word that put him at risk. Don't be sorry for me, she told him. Just understand my reality. The discipline inside the gangs had a blade's edge of its own. One morning, Tony pulled up to announce the latest rebrand, and a recruit named Bolo J, still on tryout, kept clowning about the name, joking they should have picked a better comic book character. The other Crips laughed. Tony didn't. There were whispers Bolo had been skimming product, and worse, that he'd fed police information about another Crips killing. So Tony drew the Glock from his waistband and slammed it into Bolo's nose, splitting it open in a spray of blood, while Tyrek watched from the passenger seat working a toothpick. Nobody dared help the boy until they'd driven off. That kind of violence, wildly out of proportion to the offense, was an ordinary Tuesday here. As Tyrek pushed his operation into Brooklyn and Queens, new territory brought him new enemies. A Queens crew called the Get Touch Boys jumped his lookouts with bats and tire irons before they could draw, and the Crips simply moved up the block rather than die over a corner. A Brooklyn set called the Very Crispy Gangsters was not so easy to satisfy. When Tyrek refused to give back a corner, they brought the fight into the triangle, beat down his crew on their own turf, and allied with the battered remnants of the Hempstead Bloods. Within hours, a Blood named J-Rock drove past the Crips corner in Brooklyn and shot a top-ranking member named Flex Butler dead, calling out "How you like us now" as he sped off. Flex lay in the gutter for half an hour before a passing addict found him, went through his pockets, smoked one of the crack rocks he pulled out, and only then bothered to call for help. The war turned three-sided and uglier still, with beatings and shootings and the rape of a woman simply because she was friendly with Tyrek. Sexual violence used the way the gangs used everything, as a weapon and a message. The people with no colors at all paid the steepest price. An older woman named Marsha Ricks had spent her life as one of the neighborhood's true believers, the kind who remembered the triangle before crack and refused to stop seeing it that way. The return of gunfire trapped her back inside her own house with the window shut, and she grew weaker, broke a leg in a fall, and finally suffered a stroke alone in her bed while shots cracked outside. On the morning of her funeral, a stray bullet, fired by J-Rock still drunk from the night before, blew out the rear window of Mike Clary's car. Clary stood in the street and cried, said one word, enough, packed what he could, and drove to Florida, leaving the broken glass on the floor of the car on purpose, so that if he ever thought about coming back, he'd remember why he left. The police never truly wanted They couldn't slip an undercover past man who could smell a cop and couldn't move a witness past the code enforced by death. Arrests thinned the ranks, and younger Crips just stepped up to replace them, and the money came back faster than Tyrek could spend it. A war, he decided, was simply part of the business, even good for it. When people are getting shot, nobody pays attention to the drugs being sold behind the bodies. So the conflict didn't end. It settled into something permanent and low, a new normal the gangs and the addicts and the police all learned to live around. One detective, who'd given his whole career to the place, took a job somewhere else and admitted they hadn't given up so much as run out of answers. The moment that broke him was when a kid he'd been sure would make it out to college got shot instead. The one approach that had ever truly worked sat in the village's own recent past. Years earlier, police and prosecutors had cleaned out an even bigger market nearby by pairing a zero-tolerance crackdown with a hand extended to the low-level dealers. Job training, treatment, one chance to walk away before the cell door closed. Crime there collapsed, but the dealers it displaced didn't vanish. They drifted down to the triangle, which simply inherited the crown. Even Donna Crawford, who had lost 2 sons and sworn to protect the third, would watch that last boy start dealing part-time with what remained of the Bloods. It was never going to end, she said. The triangle would always be full of drugs and colors, and it would always swallow the children. A little piece of hell sitting in one of the richest counties in the country. Steed got further out than most. He landed in New Jersey, worked as a cook, earned his GED, started talking about a real life. But the scar was still there, and his hand still drifted up to it, and he could not stop turning over the child he'd lost, the woman he'd lost, and the friends Tyrek's people had killed, Doc, Lamar, and finally Ice, the businessman who had nearly gotten out. He thought about going back to kill Tyrek so often, he said, that he'd come to believe it was simply going to happen. A man who'd done him like that had to get got. Maybe next week, maybe next year. He never got the week or the year. On a snowy night in early 2014, Steed Wallace was found dead of a gunshot wound on a desolate corner in Camden, New Jersey, on his way to sign up for an SAT prep exam. Most of his friends believed the order had come from Tyrek. The Crips would never say. It didn't matter who shot him, Tyrek offered. He was just glad somebody finally did. He should have stayed in LA. When the call came, no family stepped forward to claim the body. His mother dead of cancer, his siblings long estranged, so 2 men from the old neighborhood drove out to Jersey to identify him themselves. Standing over him, one of them said the boy lying there made him feel like they had failed and asked the Lord for help. And here is the weight the story leaves you holding. To get inside these crews, the man who chronicled them had to promise to change nearly every name, so the boy called Tyrek and the boy called Steed exist in no court file under those names, and the girl whose stabbing set it all in motion is a name no record will ever fully confirm. What is left is the shape of the thing. A scar given in a lobby over a high school girlfriend made one boy the king of an underworld and sent the other on a 6-year vendetta that outlived him. And the war that vendetta lit shot dozens, orphaned children, and emptied a village. Whether one teenage girl truly caused all of that, or whether the corners and the kilos and the half-century of hatred would have found their own reasons regardless, is the question Hempstead never stopped long enough to ask. Because the war it started never really stopped. The same snowy night Steed Wallace died unclaimed in New Jersey, back in the Triangle, a Crip named Tony was speeding to a hospital where his second son had just been born. He kissed the baby on the forehead, told him he'd grow up with a lot of heart, and went down to the car to fetch the gift he'd bought, a tiny onesie in Crips blue.